somewhere above the city lights, you're falling in love. Still aware, you know it.
I'm going to be using the following materials and patterns to sew this halter neck dress. There's already a separate pattern tutorial which I'm going to be linking down below if you haven't seen it already. In terms of fabric, I decided to work with this very lush, very over the top material that was a leftover from my traditional marriage. I had about 4 to 5 meters, but I ended up using only 2 meters of the main fabric. It also came with a matching lining which didn't have any embroidery or bedazzling in it, and I worked with that as well. You also need a long zip in a matching color to go onto the back of the dress. I say about 20 inches should work. I have matching thread, my pins, scissors, as well as my tape. So the first thing I'm going to be doing is to cut out my dress panels. I've already pinned them down flat. I'm cutting out my main dress, and you would need one layer of sort of your main outer shell, and then you use the same patterns to cut your lining. Having the lining is something I decided to do for this particular dress design because the main fabric is thin, and it's something that I would have to wear like some kind of undergarment to cover up my underwear. So I've gone ahead to cut out all my pieces. I have my ruffle piece which I cut in the main drama part of this fabric that has the lace and the beadwork. I've already done the pattern, and I used the pattern to cut this particular piece here. I went ahead to cut my main dress pieces, my front, my backs, and because this dress has quite a few panels, just remember to cut your notches where necessary so you know what particular parts go together, such as your waist, your bust, and your hip. I've also cut out my lining panels using the same patterns I used to cut my main or outer dress. I've cut my collar pieces, and I ended up cutting 2 pairs of the collar, so one set to go on the outside and another set to go on the inside, so we can bag it out and have a clean finish along the neckline. The first thing I'm going to be doing is to join my front panels. The front has 3 panels, so I'm going to be joining them up these sides like so, and this should enable me to have one piece for the front that we can join to the back along the side seam. So I'm just going in here to pin together the last of this particular edge of the front panels, and I'm going to be sewing both seams up on a 1 centimeter seam allowance using a normal straight stitch on my domestic machine. Because this fabric doesn't have any stretch, I just worked with regular tension and sort of an average stitch length, remembering to do my back stitch at the beginning and at the end. Once I saw done, I went ahead to press my seams open on low heat because this fabric is very sensitive to temperature and steam, and this is what my front looks like. So I can go ahead and join my back panels together, leaving my center back open because that's where we're going to be fixing our zip. I've just gone ahead to pin left and right panels together, and I'm going to be sewing this edge up on a 1 centimeter seam allowance using a normal straight stitch. So your back panels are going to be 4, and then you join up 2 on each side, so you end up with 1 panel on the left and 1 panel on the right, which you can go ahead to connect to your main front along the side seams. So once I'm done doing this, I'm going to go ahead and press my seam open like we did for the front. Just be careful of temperature because I ended up roasting the bottom of one of these back pieces. Thankfully it was at the edge, so I was really lucky with that part. So next up, I'm going to join my side seams together, connecting my front to my back, so we have 1 full dress piece that we can join to our lining along the armhole and neckline. So I'm going to take this in my machine, and I'm going to be sewing up the side seams, matching notched points at the bust, waist, and hip on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, remembering to do my back stitch at the beginning and at the end. I'm going to do this for the left and for the right hand side, and then press all of my seams nice and open so it just looks a lot neater. With that all done, I'm going to go ahead and sew my collar pieces together. I've pinned them together along the shoulder points, so you end up with 2 collar pieces that you can join along the inner neckline, turn inside out, and connect to your dress. So I'm sewing here on a 1 cm seam allowance, connecting my shoulder points in place, doing my back stitch when necessary to ensure my seams don't unravel with time. So with that done, I press my seams open and pin both collar pieces together along that inner neck or curve, because that is going to be the top of the collar, and the bottom edge is going to go into the neckline of the main dress. Ensure to leave the back edge open because the zip is going to sit there as well, except you want to fix buttons or you want to add like an extended scarf that you can tie up to make a bow tie. The choice is really yours. You can be as creative as you want to be, but mine is just going to have a simple zip going up into the collar. So next up, I'm going to take my scissors and I'm going to be cutting tiny snips along this inner curve seam like so, and this would enable me to turn this collar piece inside out a lot easier, and the seams would relax a lot easier as well because of those like incisions that we just made. So I went ahead to press this nice and flat, and this is what the collar is looking like. Just remember to join all your lining panels together, ready to be connected to the main dress. I just followed the same steps, joined the fronts, the backs, and then joined up the side seams together, so we have one piece that looks identical to the one for the main dress. Next up, I'm going to go ahead and pin both layers together, so the main dress and the lining along the arm curve for the left and for the right hand side. I'm just putting together seamed angles and notched points because I'm going to be sewing up both arm curves, and then I'm going to turn this inside out, and that would allow that edge of the dress to look really nice and neat because it's going to be on show. So I'm just sewing here on a 1 cm seam allowance, joining both of my main dress to my lining along this particular edge like so, and I'm just taking my time sewing around those curved points that can be a bit tricky sometimes, and doing my back stitch at the end. So when I was done with that, I turned it inside out and I did my usual edge stitch that holds the lining to the seam allowance on the inside, and what this will do is it will help to keep the lining on the inside. This particular point is optional, but I like doing it because it prevents the lining from rolling out over time when you wear your dress. So now that that is done, we can go ahead to join the collar to the dress along the neckline, and the way I'm going to do this is I'm going to pin this front edge like this on this left hand side and on the right hand side, and we know that that's the edge that is going to sit into that front neckline. I'm going to use a pin as well for the back neckline, so I'm going to mark the exact edge where it's going to go into the back neckline for the left and for the right hand side. And what I'm going to do after this particular point is I'm going to be sewing up all the areas that are going to be on show, because the way the alternate work is that area that dangles across your shoulder on the left and the right hand side, except you want to do a tiny edge stitch and fold it in. I'm going to sew it on the wrong side like this and then turn the collar piece inside out, so we have a backed out edge on the areas that are not going to be fitted into the front or the back collar. So now that I've stitched that up, I'm just using my tiny scissors to cut the edges of the stitch for the left and for the right hand side, and this would allow the parts that are meant to be fitted into the neckline to go in a lot easier because they will have that definitive edge between the side that is sewn and the side that is open. I hope that makes sense. So now that I'm done cutting those edges, I'm just turning the collar piece inside out. This took a bit of time, but it eventually came out, and this is what my collar piece looked like. I think the only thing I'll change about this collar is I'll make it a lot wider because it will just make turning this entire thing inside out quicker as well. So now that I've done that, I went ahead to give the collar piece a press, and I'm just pinning it to the front first like this. I'm going to pin notched point to notch point for the center front edge. I'm just going to push through this side for the right back and do it for the left back as well. And once those particular points are pinned like this, I'm going to turn the dress inside out. So I'm going to lift the lining and I'm going to pull out the edges that we did not stitch, or the open edges of the collar, and I'm going to pin that into the neckline of the dress. So that back area there, the front area here. So when you stitch the neckline into this particular point, you don't have any raw edges showing along the neckline of your dress. So I'm just going to sew all areas for the back, for the front, using a normal straight stitch on a 1 centimeter seam allowance, and this is what the collar looks like. Like I said earlier on, I wish it was wider and a tad lower, and I would have loved it, but it's not bad. I have to say, it's not bad. So once that is all done, I can go ahead to work on my zip, and the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to overlock my center back edges, and this would connect my main dress to the lining on the center back edges for the left and for the right hand side. If you're going to be working with a fabric that has stones like mine, just remember to pick them out along the seam allowance, else you will break your machine or a few needles. I just remember to do that at every step of the way, and even though it made the sewing a lot slower, it was definitely worth it. So I've gone ahead to pin together my center back edges, and I've laid my zip along the edges like so I know how far down the zip is going to open on the dress. I'm just using a pin to mark the point where the zip ends. I usually mark about 1 to 2 centimeters above the very edge of the zip, and I will sew from the bottom of the hem to that zip stopping point. Once I'm done sewing that bottom edge of my center back, I am going to fix my zip into the top end that is exposed like so. So I'm going to be using my easy technique of pinning corresponding sides of zip tape to the edge of the center back. And because we've already overlocked the center back edge or seam, we don't need to worry about doing this after we're done fixing our zip. So I'm just pinning in the ends of the zip on this side like so. I went ahead to pin up the other side, and we're going to be sewing left side of the zip tape to left side of the center back edge, and so on and vice versa. So I'm using a narrow zip footer to sew into the center back edge, sewing the zip into that particular point like so, and this just allows me to sew as close as possible as I can to the zip teeth. And this is also the kind of footer that you would use if you were sewing in an invisible zip. So once I get to this edge like so, I'm going to do a back stitch and repeat the same thing for the other side of the zip. So after doing that, I want to give my dress a press, and this is what it looks like. I think I really like how the finishing turned out, and I'm excited to see how it looks like on. So I'm just going in here to sew my ruffle piece, which is a measurement that is twice the hem width, and the length or the height is something that you can change if you want to. So I'm going to be hand sewing this back end close, and I'm going to be creating a French seam because of the stones that this fabric has on this particular end. So I'm going to be sewing one time across like this from the top all the way to the bottom, and when I get to the bottom of the fabric or the bottom of this particular seam here, I'm going to flip this piece inside out, so I am sewing on the wrong side. And what this will do is it will tuck the raw edge inside this particular seam here, so when you look on the inside of the dress, you don't have a raw seam or a raw edge. This took a bit of time because it's hand stitching, and because I wanted it to look really nice and neat, I was very slow. And you have to sew in such a way that you avoid the stones, but your seams or your stitch cannot be too wide. And because this fabric also had lace at this particular point, the stitch cannot be too big as well. So just take your time sewing if you're going to be using a similar fabric, but once you do that, it looks really, really nice, really neat, and you know you've saved yourself a few broken needles on your machine. So now that this ruffle piece is all done, I'm going to be taking it to my machine, and I'm going to be making some gathers. So I'll be sewing on the top edge that doesn't have any stones or lace, and I'm going to be sewing using the longest stitch. And what this will help me do is when I pull the top thread of this particular seam here, it forces the fabric to gather up, and this is the easiest way I know to make gathers to create a ruffle or to make a gathered skirt or a gathered sleeve detail for a dress or something for yourself. It's really simple, really easy. Just don't pull too hard so you don't break the thread, because if you break that thread, you literally have to start all over again. So I'm just taking my time pushing the gathering down along the way as I pull that top thread, and I'm going to fit this ruffle piece into the hem of the dress. So I'm going to first go ahead and pin it together. I'm pinning it into both layers of the top dress or the main dress, so through the outer dress and the lining as well. So we only have one seam for this particular point. Once all of that is pinned up and ready to go, I'm going to take this to my machine and I'm going to be sewing the gathered ruffle piece into the bottom of the top dress on a 1 centimeter seam allowance using a normal straight stitch. As you sew along the way, just remember to sort of rearrange or regather those ruffles in areas that you think are too tight, and ensure that both edges of your gathered piece and the hem of the main dress, they match together. So once you're done with that, you can go ahead and overlock this particular seam here, and that will just help to cut any threads that you don't need and will prevent that edge from scratching on the bottom when you wear this dress over time. And because this particular edge didn't have any stones, I was sort of not afraid of putting it under my overlocker. So with that done, this is what the finished dress looked like. I gave it a good press. It fits really nicely on. It's comfortable. It's actually not too tight. That's something I was very worried about because it's a dress I'll probably be wearing on the holidays, so I wanted to feel comfortable in it. You could also dress it up with some gold accessories or whatever color that corresponds to the fabric that you're working with. But I hope you guys enjoyed watching this video. The same, if you did, please give it a thumbs up, comment all of your thoughts, ideas and suggestions down below, and I'll see you guys in my next one. Bye.